Call Chris Hipkins.
Very much, Mr. Chair, and I will again make my contribution on Part 3 relatively brief. And I guess the first point that I'd like to make in reading through the Part 3, particularly clauses 17, actually most of the clauses have it in, is the use of the word entitlement. I think if I was writing this bill from scratch, I would avoid the use of the word entitlement, because I think the public quite rightly get upset about that. And actually what we're talking about are business-related expenses. These are the expenses that members of Parliament incur in order to be representatives of the people, to do the job that we are sent here to do. So we're talking about travel to get to and from Parliament and to get around the country in order to be able to see people and represent them, accommodation for those people when they are travelling around the country and when they are here in Wellington. Those are they are work-related expenses. Now, and I think I want to draw the House's attention and to those of the public who are listening in, particularly to clause 17(1)(b), because I think there's a lot of public misunderstanding around personal benefits from the job-related expenses that we get. And what this clause does, 17(1)(b), is it basically says that if there is a personal benefit from any of the expenses that we are effectively that are covered through our parliamentary activities, that will be taken into consideration by the Remuneration Authority when our salaries are determined. So in other words, if through this legislation or through any determinations issued by the Speaker or the Minister from Ministerial Services or through the Remuneration Authority, we end up with things that we personally benefit from, we effectively will end up being paid less as a result of that. So there's a safeguard in there for the taxpayer that none of these decision makers in this legislation can do things that will give members of Parliament a personal benefit without there being some offset against the salaries that we receive. And I think that that's quite right. I think that that's a very legitimate expectation. It adheres to the principles that are set out in the Act about being fair to the taxpayer, which I think is very, very important, about there being transparency and the need for public understanding of the work that members of Parliament do. I think that those things are relatively well safeguarded in here. If I was writing this from scratch, I would do it differently. And again, I think one of the things that I would say is I'd try and avoid the use of the term entitlement, because I actually think that sends all of the wrong messages around what we're trying to do. What we need to do here, and what this legislation aims to do, is ensure that members of Parliament can be effective advocates for the people that vote for us, that send us here to Parliament. So that involves we do need to be able to be here in Wellington. I'm one of the members who can speak with no conflict here. I don't get any Wellington accommodation allowance. I don't have any interest in that whatsoever, but I absolutely accept for members of Parliament who don't live in Wellington, they should have that. They should be able to stay here. They should be able to find accommodation arrangements that are appropriate to them, and that should be covered, because I don't see how they could possibly do their jobs as members of Parliament without it. I also benefit probably less or have less reason to be concerned about the travel sections of this bill too, because again I'm a Wellington Member of Parliament. I drive home every day, so I stay at my house. I don't fly as much as other members do, but I think that I will absolutely defend the rights of members of Parliament when it comes to their air travel as well. I think it's very important that members of Parliament have the flexibility to travel to and from their constituencies using air travel, and to travel around the country to attend to other things. And one of the things, while I'm an absolute advocate for transparency, one of the things that would concern me greatly would be the idea that members of Parliament would stop travelling and stop making themselves available to the voting public, to the general public, because of the potential perceptions and risks. So if every Member of Parliament, every time they agree to travel somewhere, thinks, I am going to have to justify this very trip, I'm going to have to justify this individual airfare, then the result of that will be members of Parliament will attend fewer events and will become less accessible to members of the public. So I think the really important thing, and again I say this as someone who probably has less reason to call on these services than others, because I live in Wellington, I absolutely think it's important that we have transparency to the point that is necessary that the public can be assured that the system is not being abused and that members of Parliament are not claiming and personally benefiting from things that they shouldn't be. But I absolutely also think it's important that members of Parliament have the freedom to travel around the country where necessary to do the job that the New Zealand public require us to do.
Call Machiria Ture.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have